very much. Nice to see you, Frank. And Beulah, sitting down there, hiding away from the stage. What a joy it is for us to welcome you back to St. James. It's been a while since you've been here. As Scott said at the beginning, Frank and Beulah actually were the couple who, under God and in His goodness, founded St. James many, many moons ago in the late 1960s, before that block of flats was there, before this building was here, before that building was there, in a time when this was a growing, burgeoning space. And you can read all about that in this book. But before I get to this book, Frank, I think the first thing I ever read that you wrote was a little tract. It must have been 1982. I was a new Christian in the army, and I remember picking up a little booklet that you wrote called Don't Embalm Your Dog. What was that all about?
Well, first of all, let me say what a great pleasure it is to be back here again. Thank you, Mervyn, for the invitation and for your great kindness to us this morning. That little book that you referred to, it was not an advert for the SPCA or anything like that. What happened in those very early days is we were seeking every opportunity to reach people for Christ. And as Mervyn said, very few of these blocks of flats you see around you now were built. But in one of those blocks of flats, in one of the flats that was built, they came across the body of a dead lady. She had died all by herself. She didn't have a single family member. She had no one. She had been dead for some days before they discovered her body. But with her body, they discovered her dog, which had died before her, and she had had the dog embalmed. And she had left it in the flat with her because she had no one else. And the dog was the only person that the only animal, the only thing that she could relate to was this dog. And I thought how sad that was. In our area, there should be somebody who could be so lonely. And so I wrote a little tract called Don't Embalm Your Dog, and we distributed it, in which I related the story and encouraged people to remember there was a church in their area which would welcome them. And they don't need to embalm their dogs. They can come to the church and find friends and find a new family and find new hope in Christ. So that's what it was about.
And over the years, a number of books have been written, been big help to me and to many, books about the Christian life, little evangelistic tracts, some that we still use here, Crossing the Line and others. A biography of Bishop Festo Kavenjere, who was a very fine evangelical bishop under Idi Amin in Uganda in a time when Christians were persecuted. And most recently, this little book, which is called God Said Yes, A New Church, a Small Congregation, and God! Exclamation mark. The story of the early years in St. James Church, Kenilworth. And Frank, maybe just to start, as we talk about this book, maybe you can just tell us what it was that motivated you to write this little book.
Thank you, Mervyn. If you asked anybody today about St. James's Church, if they remembered at all, they would refer it to the massacre. After all said and done, the massacre remains with us, whether we like it or not. And even to this day, I get requests regarding speaking about the massacre or comments about the massacre. It's now in our school curriculum, in our history curriculum. Last year, my granddaughter, who's now at Stellenbosch University, in a matric year, had a history class in which the massacre and all of its aftermath was mentioned, and there was a video shown in her class of me being interviewed for the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. So she told the teacher, "That's my grandpa," and the teacher made sure she told every class after that, "That's the leader's grandpa." The point is that the massacre is there now, and it's part of our history. And I discovered this weekend that it's even it's even in the Nelson Mandela Museum. So whether we like it or not, there it is. Now, if you talk to anyone today about St. James's Church, they will define it by the massacre. But I want to say to you that that is entirely wrong. That St. James's Church is not defined by the massacre. It is defined by something that happened many years before that, in the early days when St. James was first started in the late 1960s, when my wife and I came down here as a young married couple, and we started with 4 children from the neighborhood, our first congregation, and from that things grew. And when we had a small congregation of adults, we used to meet for prayer, and we on a Saturday, and pray that God would bless us and help us, and that He would bring people to our new little church in our broken down buildings that existed then, and that He would bless us. And we used to pray fervently, and everybody prayed, even new Christians prayed. There was a sense of not being shy, of praying, and everybody prayed in their broken English and broken grammar. They would pray that God would meet with us. And then there came a time when God said yes, and His presence came upon us. And from that time on, we experienced exponential growth, and we had conversions, and we had excitement, and we had the most amazing things happening in our church, amazing conversions, and what we would call coincidences and providences of God that took place. And in those days, which lasted right for the first 5 or 6 or 7 years of our church, when God moved in that very special way, that was how our church was defined. It was defined by the gospel. It was defined by the cross. It was defined by conversion. It was defined by things like, we made many mistakes, but that's how we were defined, and that's how God prepared us for what happened 20 years later when the massacre took place. So that was our definition, and that's why I wrote the little book, because I'm old, and the people who were with us in those days are fewer and fewer and fewer, and I'm one of the few people who remember what happened in those days, and I wanted to get it down on paper, even if no one ever bought the book. I just wanted it there as a testimony and a witness to the glory of God and all the wonderful things He did for His own name in those days. So that's the story of the book.
Well, I'm sure people will buy the book. And if you would like to do that, then the way to do that is to pop into the DG Mills Hall right behind me. You can buy it with cash or snap scan today. We'll have copies available for a number of weeks going forward. So if you aren't able to get a copy today, or because it's too crowded, then please just remember that going forward. I've read it. I found it hugely encouraging. What this book reminded me of was the importance of ministry to families, and the importance of getting the gospel clear and getting the gospel courageously out into our city. From this church, many churches have been planted. More recently, Red Post again, and that is just the beginning of what we hope will be God saying yes again in our day, in our time, as we seek to serve Him. And what a great time for God to start saying yes in your life or my life this morning when Bishop Frank preaches for us. So I'm going to hand over to him to read and then to speak to us. Thank you, Frank. It's so lovely to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.